Last night, we started to hear about a wave of heroin overdoses that has resulted in emergency room visits all at Fletcher Allen. Last I heard, it was up to 9. What do you know about that investigation? Do we have a strain of something particularly nasty going around, or what can you tell us about it?
Well, first, I just want to say how grateful I am, not only to Fletcher Allen, to our docs, nurses, and healthcare providers who worked so hard on this. Also grateful to the fact that we're a state where Narcan is readily available and saves lives in situations like this. But also to the Burlington PD and to the state police who are working hard to figure out what went wrong where. But listen, here's the main point. If you're addicted to heroin, you are in a high-risk situation that is more likely than not going to lead to overdose that may well take your life. And the tragedy of this disease is that it kills you in many cases. If it doesn't kill you, it destroys your life. And recovery, as Dick can tell you, is a lifelong struggle with a lot of ups and a lot of downs. So, you know, I can't comment on what was actually in this batch of heroin. I can tell you, if you shoot heroin, more likely than not, you're going to overdose and you may well die.
Does this motivate you to put more money into state lab testing into these drugs when there's a large group of overdoses?
Well, the problem, as you know, is getting to the substance that you'd have to test. And, we've got a lot of dealers, as does every other state in America, who's selling different batches of all kinds of drugs. And there's just no way that any state can test it before it gets used. So, listen, this is a high-risk disease. It's a terrible, debilitating place to be. And we've got to, unfortunately, expect that if there's going to be heroin use in a state, you're going to have overdoses. And our job is to try to get Narcan as many hands as we can so that we can bring people back when they're overdosing in many situations or otherwise they would die. And secondly, do a better job of educating all of us to the fastest things that we can do to save lives when you're overdosing from bad.
Can you talk about your trip to Washington and what you got out of it?
Yeah, I was the keynote at a forum on this very subject, opioid addiction, that was hosted by Governor Whitehouse and Governor Portman. And, it was really it was encouraging to me that the federal government, the Congress, in this case, the United States Senate, is asking the question, how can we partner with states to get them the resources that they need to more successfully battle addiction across America? And it's got to be a partnership. And as you know, as you just heard from Dick and the many other organizations that are helping on the front lines, trying to move people into recovery, the battle is resources. For years in Vermont, we've had waiting lines for people who say, I'm addicted, my life's been destroyed, I'm ready to go into treatment. And we say to them, sorry, we don't have room for you. So that's a money problem. That's a system that can be fixed. And when you have some very effective senators saying, hey, we get this, we understand, we're aboard, it's bipartisan. It was the Republican senator from Ohio in this case and the Democratic senator from Rhode Island coming together with a lot of other folks from Congress saying, how can we help? So I wasn't able to stay for the whole conference. I know Senator Sears was there later in the day and on a panel, but it's the right question for our federal government to be asking. How can we partner with states to be more effective in the fight against addiction?
You also made some comments yesterday morning about the state of play in gubernatorial races. Do you think that Wendy Davis's campaign is not destined to win?
No. We have high hopes for Wendy Davis. Listen, this is what I said yesterday. We know that Texas has been a red state, that it's been a tough state for Democrats since one of my favorite governors, Ann Richards. What we have in Wendy Davis is an incredibly articulate, capable, committed candidate who gives us more hope in Texas of winning a governorship than we've had in decades. So we're very optimistic and hopeful about Texas and about Wendy.
So the administration gave a draft consolidation school governance plan to the Senate Education Committee that they're looking at today. And it seems to take a voluntary route and takes the mandates out and doesn't have a mechanism to impose consolidation on schools. Did you come to the conclusion that a forced mandate for consolidation was the wrong way to go?
No, what I'm saying is, as governor, we've got a problem. The problem is that we have a education delivery system that literally has over 30,000 fewer students than we used to have. The number's going to keep dropping. Property taxpayers just can't take more property tax increases. And if we don't figure out a way to administratively right-size the ship so that we have a more efficient delivery system for fewer students, our property taxes are not going to go down. It's just that simple. They're going to continue to rise beyond Vermonters' ability to pay. So the role that I'm trying to play is to listen very carefully to the House and their ideas, to listen very carefully to the Senate and their ideas, and to bring the two bodies together so that we get out of here with a bill. Because my point is, listen, we know that there's no bill we're going to pass that's going to solve all of our problems. But if we don't get a good start at helping our communities in partnership with them, figure out a better way to deliver top quality education in a system that's right-sized, that is literally educating, in just the last few years, 20,000 fewer students than we were just a few years ago, property taxpayers are going to continue to be burdened. So I'm trying to bring both sides together to come up with a bill that will work. And some are saying we don't have time. And I'm saying, I don't think that Vermonters who are struggling to pay their property taxes are going to have a lot of patience for the argument that we couldn't get anything done because we didn't have time. I'm very encouraged that we can bring together the two sides to get a bill.
But you did, you made a very conscious effort not to have a mandatory, if you don't do it, we're going to do it for you.
Right.
You decided not to take that approach. Why?
I think what we're saying is the House has passed a very thoughtful bill. The Senate has the capacity to pass a very thoughtful bill. They've asked my administration for ideas. We've given them. We know what the Senate doesn't like, so there's no sense in going in with what they don't like. Let's see if we can get some ideas there, get a bill to conference, and come out of here with a bill.
So if someone said, we've had incentives for the last couple of years, school districts don't seem very interested in it. Why continue down that road? Why do you think incentives are going to work in the future when they failed in the past?
I'm not going to take sides at this point on exactly what incentives we should provide. The side I'm going to take is this simple. We got a few days or weeks left. We've got a big problem. Vermonters cannot continue to afford property tax increases that have been going up higher than their incomes. Let's get out of here with a bill that moves the ball down the field towards an education system that has less administrative burden, administrative waste, and expensive administration that we can't afford.
Governor, what's your opinion of the tiered employer assessment tax that has been introduced in the Senate?
Well, first of all, I want to say how grateful I am to the legislature for not choosing to raise revenue by raising income taxes, sales taxes, and rooms and meals taxes on hardworking Vermonters. You may recall a year ago we weren't in that situation, and I'm really grateful to the leadership of the legislature for saying, hey, yeah, we get it. Vermonters aren't running around saying, hey, we got a lot of extra loot in our pockets. Can you figure out ways to raise our taxes? So I'm grateful for that. In terms of the plan that's being discussed in the Senate, I'm going to be a little zen on that too. You know what our idea is. We kind of like our idea. We presented that in my budget. We're open to other ideas. We need a very small amount of revenue, and I think that we should be open to how we raise it.
Governor, do you have any response to the civil suit filed by Representative Cynthia Browning today?
I didn't know there was one.
She filed suit in response to the appeal denial that Secretary of Administration Spalding sent her in response to her FOIA request for single-payer financing plans.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of it, so it's hard for me to comment on something I don't know anything about.
How is progress on the financing plan coming?
My team's continuing to work on it. Listen, I know that we got a lot of work to do before the legislature gets out of here. we all know that we never asked them to come up with a way to finance, better way to finance healthcare in Vermont in this session. So I'm really focused on what the legislature that we have to get done in the next couple of weeks here. And to be honest with you, that isn't on the list. So we're not spending a lot of time in these 14 days trying to figure out how to get here with a bill that starts to reduce property taxes and many other challenges we face, a balanced budget, a jobs bill that gets me the incentives we need to grow jobs and help keep companies here, bring companies in that might not come. So, I'm not going to pretend that we're sitting around in these days really working hard on that one. We will after they go home.
But you got a guy working full-time on that, right?
Sure, he is, but I'm just saying, if you're asking me whether I'm sitting in a lot of meetings on that one, I'm not, and I won't until the legislature adjourns.
So, in terms of what your, threshold decision that you've come to, you know for sure that you want to raise through some tax or combination thereof the amount that Vermonters are paying today in private premiums?
Well, listen, we've plowed this ground before. I'm happy to plow it again, but this is my belief. If we continue to see healthcare costs go up at the same rate for the next 10 years that they did for the last 10 years, every dollar that we have that businesses want to give raises to hardworking Vermonters won't happen, because all of our expendable cash has been eaten up by rising healthcare costs. That's just where we're at. When we talk about the minimum wage, the reason that hardworking Vermonters and Americans, middle-class Americans, haven't seen raises in the last decade, one of them is that healthcare costs are rising faster than our incomes, and frankly faster than the profit lines for many, many small businesses. So if healthcare costs aren't controlled, we won't get the money in our pockets that we need to prosper. So this is a big deal. And when I, as governor, I get up and I work on many issues in a day. Some are crisis management, that I do a lot of. But when I say, when I'm gone, when I'm no longer governor, when I look at the problems going forward for Vermont and for jobs and economy and business, this is top of the list. So we're trying to do two things. The first is move from a fee-for-service delivery system that reimburses our providers for quantity instead of quality of care, so that we spend less money for better outcomes. And then the second question we have is the way that we pay for health care fair? And I think most Vermonters would say, no, it's not. If we design this system from scratch, and I said to all of you, hey, design a system to pay for health care in Vermont so that everybody has it and it's fair, and you came back with the current system, you said, hey, I've got an idea. We'll do this through private insurance companies or public insurance companies, and those that want to pay for health insurance and the companies, the businesses that want to and think it's the right thing to do will, and the businesses and individuals that don't want to won't, but don't worry about it because the people who refuse to or can't will be paid for by those who do. You'd say, come on, that's a crazy idea. So all I'm saying is, if we can move from a premium system that's not working to one where we all pay based on our ability to pay, we will be a much stronger state, we'll have a much stronger economy, and we'll have a much better quality of life.
Governor, I wanted to go back to the toxics bill for a minute, if I could, and ask you just...
For the toxics?
Yeah. What are your current thoughts about that? And, the House is going with kids up to 12, and the Senate is going, I guess, with everybody. Do you have a position on the bill? And
I want a bill that gets dangerous poisons out of Vermont when kids are being exposed to them. And I think the House did a good job on that. We all know that toxics are one of the leading causes of health concerns for our children. So, I think the House has done well with the bill. I think the Senate's doing a good job debating at their end, and my job as governor will be to try to bring the two parties together to get a bill that makes Vermont a safer place from dangerous toxics that may well cause cancer and other diseases.
Are you relieved that your administration was successful in scaling it back as much as it did, moving from the Senate to the House, or do you wish they were able to scale it back further or kill it?
I think the House has passed a good bill. I think the Senate has some good ideas. We're going to bring them together and get out of here with a bill. That's my goal.
So why is the House version better than the Senate version? That sounds like you prefer that one.
Well, at this point in the session, I'm just going to be candid with you. I'm not going to get too into the weeds. My job is to try, this is a tough time of year for legislators. I served in both the House and the Senate. They tend to both feel that their version is right, and the governor's job is to try pull them together and get a bill that makes sense for everybody, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm not going to tell you I like one version better than the other. I'm just going to tell you I like the bill, and I want to get out of here with this thought.
Right.
But I understand your administration has been pretty active in trying to scale back that bill and make it weaker.
Well,
misunderstanding
that's
that?
certainly not how we view it.
How do you-
We don't view that we've weakened the bill in any way. What we want to try to do is get a bill that works for Vermont and protects our kids.
Is it important to you that the bill give the Department of Health the authority and the power to regulate and ban certain chemicals?
It's important to me that whatever bill that we bring to my desk works. And so what our concern is, number one, to get it done so that we're a state that's helping to lead in getting these toxic chemicals out of, from having exposure to toxic chemicals when Vermonters shouldn't. And the second piece is to make sure it's something administratively we can actually implement, and that's what we're trying to get done.
And can the Department of Health handle that duty?
We won't sign a bill that the Department of Health can't handle.
But I mean, I'm assuming you've talked with Harry about this at length. Are you confident in the Department of Health's ability to undertake the work that would be necessary to determine whether or not it's appropriate to regulate or ban a certain chemical?
To be candid, that depends on what we're being asked to do, and that's why we're spending so much time coming up with a bill that not only works, but that we can actually administratively implement. And I think we'll get there. I think if you take, we'll get that done.
Back to education, just regarding the Senate and what they're working on, does the House version that would mandate consolidation, does that bother you?
I think the House has done good work. Listen, as I said last week, there's a difference between closing or consolidating schools, which I don't believe Montpelier should be doing, and I've told you that many, many times. If you want to see a real mess on your hands, ask Montpelier to decide what schools should stay open and what schools should close. That's a decision local communities should make and will make. There's a difference between asking to consolidate schools and asking for a smarter way to consolidate administration. And we have more school administration in Vermont than any state in America. We have among the highest per pupil spending in America. You've got to be able to put those two things together. And when you hear people say, you know, my property taxes are too high, I can't afford to have them continue to go up, you can't disconnect that concern and complaint from the fact that we're spending a ton of loot to administrate a very small school system. So I think the House made great strides in saying, let's find ways to have a smarter administration, K through 12. I don't think there's too many Vermonters that don't think that's a logical place to go. And I think that we should ask the Senate to continue to work on that plan and come up with something that will move the ball.
Did something change for you before town meeting? You were asking school boards to spend less and seem to be putting the onus on them. And
Can we back up on that? In fairness, because if you go back and see what I said, this is what I said. I know I've read about it in a number of forums. But listen, we're partners with the school boards in trying to get more affordable property taxes for Vermonters. The school boards are doing a great job. What I said was, if you live in a town, voters, or in a community where you're seeing huge increases in your school budget, ask some tough questions. So I never said go in and, beat up your school boards. They're doing a great job. I simply said, in places where we're seeing double-digit increases, ask tough questions, and Vermonters did.
Governor, do you think filing suit in Superior Court for whatever work you've completed on Green Mountain Care so far is sort of a step too far in this quest by Cynthia Browning?
I'm not going to comment on something that I've only heard about from all of you. All I can tell you is this. This is going to be one of the most important decisions that we make for Vermont, and it's really critical that we get it right. And as you all know, this is really hard stuff. I mean, to move from healthcare premiums to a whole different way of paying for healthcare, if you don't get this right, you're going to really regret it. So what I've asked my team to do is take the time necessary to really drill down into every single idea that we can come up with and come up with a plan that we believe in. That's going to take time, and there is no one that knows better than me. Don't go out with something until you get it right, and we're going to get it right.
But you know enough to know that the payroll tax is going to be a component of it?
I don't.
So it sounded, a few months ago, you sounded pretty confident that the payroll tax would be one component of the financing plan.
Well, what I've said is that right now, businesses pay, in effect, a payroll tax for health care, because if you're an employer that pays for health insurance, it's often a very large part of your payroll. So it only makes sense that some portion of a payroll tax would be used.
Governor, I wanted to ask about drug driving. Should we be passing a law when we don't really have a standard for knowing when someone is impaired by drugs? I mean, there's a general agreement that 0.8 is the measure for alcohol. You don't know how many nanograms of THC or whatever you have in your bloodstream before you're incapable of driving well. Is this an insurmountable problem, or can we somehow get a bill passed this year despite that scientific conundrum?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, I know this is the question that you've just asked is the question the legislature has been struggling with. And it's hard to come up with a definition when you can't measure for it. You know, if you had a test like you do for alcohol, a blood test, this would be a much easier conversation. So, you know, I applaud the legislature for their efforts to try and move the ball, ask the question, if you're impaired by drugs, how do we measure that, and what should the penalty be for driving under the influence? But it is very, very difficult to measure, and I know that's the question the legislature has been struggling with. I had a conversation with Senator Sears about it recently. It's tough to get it right.
Governor, this morning the House and the Senate passed amendments that have to do with putting child protective caps on refills of liquid tobacco for e-cigarettes. What do you think of that idea?
I think that's a good idea. I think any time that we can keep e-cigarettes away from kids, we're heading in the right direction. I'm grateful that the FDA finally came out with federal guidelines for regulating e-cigarettes. And obviously, you know, any efforts that we can make to keep e-cigarettes, make it more difficult for babies and kids to get access to whatever's in them, makes a lot of sense.
And what about teenagers?
Well, it's harder to, having been a teenager in Vermont, it's harder to design a cap that a teenager can't get into, but I'm all ears.
Why do you take money from tobacco companies? And is that something that you feel comfortable doing when they send you checks?
You know, I know that you and I might disagree on this, but believe it or not, Paul, I'm not influenced by people who give my campaign money. I'm influenced by what I think is the right decisions for Vermont. And whether I get money from someone living down the street who agrees with me, or whether it comes from a company, it doesn't change how I govern.
Are there any organizations you wouldn't take money from?
Traditionally in the past, going way back to my Senate time, I often didn't take money, and I don't believe I have, from pharmaceuticals. It was an old position that I took that I have never broken, but I was trying to make a point about their influence in setting prices in America that are higher than the rest of the world. It wasn't because I thought that they would influence my vote.
But the DGA takes a ton of money from pharmaceutical companies, right?
The DGA takes money from lots of entities, yes.
Does that pharmaceutical self-ban still make sense? I mean,
Probably not, but I still do it. I'm stubborn. Ask my mom.
On single-payer financing, just for a second, the House is going to take it up this afternoon. It formally lifts the last year deadline and makes it next winter. You support that change?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Your financing plan was due last January.
Right.
And the bill on the House floor this afternoon will make it next February, I think,
Right.
next winter. You support that change?
I do, and let me tell you how we got to that date. In the original bill, when we were enacting Act 48, I was living under the illusion that we could somehow find a way around the provision in the Affordable Care Act that said no one can move to a universal access system until 2017. So you may recall I was on Bob Kinzel's show, I think it was a year ago, June, saying, you know, we're going to find a way to get around this. And, you know, I mean, this is how it sometimes works in the governor's office, but I sat around with my policy experts shortly after that, and they said, you know, Governor, you're dead wrong on that. You can't. We've looked at it from every angle, and it can't be done. And when we passed that original date, the Speaker of the House said to me, you know, this date's too soon. You know you're not going to be able to make that. And I said, well, I'm bound and determined to get this done by 2015, 2016 at the latest. Well, I faced the music. I looked at the federal law. My experts did, and came back and said, you're not going to get around this. So, that particular date didn't make a lot of sense, and the legislature, we will welcome the opportunity to be ready with a financing plan when the next biennium has to consider the question, which is next January.
But you'll fight any release before then?
Well, it's not that I'm fighting a release, it's that we don't have anything to release. We don't have a plan ready for prime time.
But you would at one point talked about like a road show where you would put out a plan and then you'd take it around the state so you could get input from regular Vermonters and businesses to see what they think about this. So if
we want to do that as soon as we have the answers to show on the road.
Right.
This is like saying, hey, can you do a road show, but you've got nothing to show?
Yeah. So you're going to be able to deliver a plan by February 3rd of 2015.
I sure hope so, yes.
So when do you think you'll be able to give Vermonters a look at what it is legislators are going to be debating next year?
The minute that we have a plan that we think will work, we'll share it with every single Vermonter to help us make it even better.
Right, but you know right now that February 3rd, you can deliver, right? You can deliver a plan by February 3rd. You can meet that deadline. So how far in advance of that will you be able to put something out to the public so they can say, okay, we've been talking about this for 4 years now. Here it is. This is what we've been talking about all this time. Let's get your thoughts so legislators, so I know what you think about it before we begin this debate in the State House.
You know that when it comes to health care, I've stopped giving dates.
February 3rd.
The legislature suggests the date of February 3rd. We'll find a way to comply.
Given the magnitude, though, of this change that you're proposing, doesn't it make some sense to allow voters to weigh in this November on at least the broad parameters of what you're proposing?
If we had it ready to weigh in, we would welcome everybody weighing in. And I know that, there are those in this state who don't want to see change to health care. They like it just the way it is. I personally think this system's going to bankrupt us, and I think it's not sustainable. And there's an awful lot of experts in the healthcare field who agree with me. So what we're trying to do, as I mentioned, is very complicated, very hard, and very important. And we're not going to go out with a plan until we have one that we can believe in. We don't have that yet.
Governor, can consolidation be expected to create property tax savings by next year? And how much savings can we anticipate without addressing personnel costs and special ed costs, which are the two biggest drivers according to the Pike's report?
I think there are two issues when it comes to this legislative session. The first is the immediate, what I call Band-Aid. How can we find a way to ensure that we leave this session not charging Vermonters 7 cents based upon the budgets that they voted? It would be 7 cents based on the local decisions that were made. We're working very hard to try and find ways, both the House and the Senate and this administration, to reduce it from some number below 7 cents. So that's the short-term problem.
So you don't agree with the House's residential rate of 4 cents? Do you don't think that's doable?
I think the House has done a great job on it. I think the Senate's now weighing in and trying to figure out what the right number is, and we'll bring them together and come out with something that's less than 7 cents. I very much want to get that done. I don't believe there's any restructuring bill or reorganization bill that will have a significant impact on property taxes for next year, simply because, if you look at the bills, they take a lot of time to phase them in, either approach, whether it's the House or the Senate. So we have to remember that it's important now to have the courage to make the changes, to right-size the ship, so that we actually have an education delivery system from an administrative standpoint that supports thousands and thousands fewer students than we had just a few years ago.
But isn't the number of teachers we have more of a cost driver than the number of administrators we have? We've got a 10-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio right now.
There's no question in my mind that the biggest challenge we face in terms of cost right now is an administrative structure that is much larger than the number of students that we're educating.
Governor, a moment ago we were talking about healthcare roadshows, and would it be wise to have this education reform idea that's out there be subjected to the same process where it's kind of taken around the state and have the public weigh in, and then it goes to the legislature? Or are we jumping the gun here a little bit?
The question is, should we get more data and wait? And my view is that Vermonters do not have the patience to wait when it comes to putting us on the path to an education delivery system that has higher quality outcomes, better outcomes, and costs less money than we otherwise would have spent. I don't hear Vermonters saying, hey, my property taxes are pretty high, but, wait 20 years and then figure it out. go to a road show. You know, we've done an awful lot of taking testimony on the subject of what's driving school budgets, what's driving property taxes, what's driving per pupil spending. And I don't think there's very many Vermonters that say the fact that we've got, you know, a couple hundred plus school districts for a very small number of students, and that number is dwindling, has nothing to do with the fact that our taxes are high.
What's your opinion on the marijuana dispensary bill that's now headed to your desk?
I think they've done good work. I think it makes sense.
Do you have an opinion about the 4 or 6 dispensaries? Is that a disagreement?
I'm going to let the legislature try to figure that one out in conference before I weigh in.
The final.
Oh, it's coming direct?
It
Yeah.
also contains a study of legalizing and regulating marijuana. What is your opinion on that?
I've said before that, as you know, I generally think studies are an opportunity to kick the can down the road and not make a decision. In this case, we're actually talking about something new and different. Now, Colorado and Washington State, thankfully, have gone before any other state in trying to figure out what legalization means. I think it does make sense for the legislature to ask, if we were to go down this route, you know, what would the implications be? What would the revenue impacts be? What would it really mean for Vermont? So I think that's an example where we're actually studying something that we've never studied before. Makes sense. I believe it would.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.